So, like the title of the video says, we are going to be covering Hildryn's third ability, Haven. So, I'm going to go in a little bit different order this time around. We're not going to cover the stats right off the bat. We're actually going to cover some mechanics right off the bat. So, I'm going to do a quick run through of Haven, what Haven says it does, and all of its little stats, and then we're going to cover how it works. Because how it works is really, really important to how good the skill is, and then we're going to go through stats one by one once we have a better understanding of what this thing actually is. So starting off, we have three numbers there for drain. We have drain, drain per ally, drain per enemy. The drain per ally and drain per enemy are both per second values. So if you have 3 allies in range, that'll be 15 per second. If you have 3 enemies in range, that'll be 75 per second. We can already see that the drain per enemy can get really scary. Now the drain number at the top again is bugged. I covered this in my previous video. Efficiency will not show up for the top drain amount there, but it does in fact affect it. We'll cover that when we get to the stats section. We have a radius of 15 meters. Now the way Haven works is when we cast Haven, we'll actually apply shields to all nearby allies. Additionally, all enemies near sorry about that. Near Hildryn herself and near the allies she is projecting shields to, they will deal damage. Now that damage is 200 per second radiation damage as shown below. Now that damage amount is very small. It does not scale with enemy level. So it isn't like some of the more recent reworked abilities that will actually scale based on the enemies nearby. And it is 15 meters. So that means we can actually scale out Haven's range to be pretty decent. However, if we scale the radius of Haven to affect allies, it will also affect the range that we're affecting enemies. That means more enemies and more energy drain per second. So big radius builds, big range builds are going to have a really hard time on ability strength, especially if you don't have any powerful arcanes to sort of back you up, or if you're using like shield restoring weapons or Rakta Dark Dagger, stuff like that. Now we have shield capacity. Shield capacity and damage per second are both affected by ability strength. We're going to cover those. There's some kind of numbers you might want to get to if you care. But we also have shield recharge. Now, interestingly enough, shield recharge is affected by ability duration. So it has a base amount of 80%. That is very, very high. And if we have a decent amount of ability duration, that can get extremely high. The only shame with that is that it doesn't affect us. It just affects allies. If you have a decent Haven build, you will be Shield Frame's best friend. Like, they will love you. It is very, very strong for them across the board. But now that we've kind of looked at the base, what is Haven? You create a shield aura around allies. Enemies that approach any shielded ally take damage. That's what it says it does. However, it does a lot more than this, both good and bad. Let's go ahead and get into what those are. So, first thing to know, the very first thing, this is super, super important for Hildryn. And this is a way bigger problem for Hildryn than it is for anybody else. So, as you guys know, if you have a channeled ability, any ability that has a energy cost per second, it will stop your energy from regenerating. Now this is super, super, super important for Hildryn. So if I drain my shields here, my shields never start regenning on their own. Every time I use them, it acts as though I've taken damage. Now if I wait a few seconds, it will begin recharging, right? So we get our recharge rolling. Now, when this is important in Haven is the fact that it is a channeled ability. So not only, like for a normal Warframe, you lose your energy regen, which can be very brutal, especially if you're using quick thinking. Then it becomes your defense as well. Well, for Hildryn, that's just how it starts. Shields are both your defense and your energy supply. So if you cast Haven, it'll actually be very scary. Now, the cool thing about Haven, as you notice in the top right, it is running. In the bottom right, you see it's pulsing, it's running. At the top right, you see we did restore our shields. We actually did regen. That's because we're not actually affecting anything right now. So if I put on carrier and I do the same thing, you will notice it doesn't actually get restored. It constantly ticks down. If you have allies in range, if you have a Sentinel, a Kubro, whatever, and you have Haven on, additionally, if you have enemies in range and you don't even have an ally in range, let's say your Kubro ran away and you don't have any allies nearby, if you cast it, it will drain and it will not restore until you get out of range of all enemies, no more lines. And if we're out of that range for like 3 seconds, I think, 2 seconds, something like that, our shields do start regenerating. So whenever this thing is actually being applied, you do not restart your shield regeneration ability. So that basically makes Haven, at least if you're going to use Haven, have a mandatory requirement for an Arcane Aegis, in my opinion. Arcane Aegis is extremely strong in general. It basically has a chance whenever you get hit to start your shields regenning, and it will keep them regenning for a short amount of time. This is incredibly important if you're going to do a Haven build on Hildryn. So, now that we've kind of covered the passive shield regeneration basically being neutered by Haven being active, which is an incredibly dangerous design. It basically makes arcanes mandatory or something else mandatory to maintain us. We also have to look at sort of the bright side. So Hildryn has a passive, and you can't really see what it is. Passive, become invulnerable for a brief moment after shields are depleted. This ability is restored when shields fully recharge. There's like 3 other passives that are shoved into Hildryn's passive, and I know this video isn't about her passive, but the important part is the part that it says right there, you become invulnerable for a brief moment after your shields are depleted. This ability is restored when shields become fully charged. So, when you use Haven, and you apply shields to allies, they gain that passive. That means when their shields go away, they actually become invincible for, I think it's 3 seconds. That is probably the strongest thing about Haven, is that it just applies your passive to nearby allies. And it is also one of the reasons why you would run Hildryn's Haven as a big AoE. Even though running it as a big AoE is actually really bad and dangerous in most scenarios. And I know that sounds really conflicting, but we'll get into some of that in a minute. So, when you apply Haven, let's go ahead and bring Carrier Prime back out. And we can kind of look at a couple stats here. So Carrier Prime has 160 with his mod on shields, right? So he has 160 shields. If I turn on Haven, he will gain whatever my Haven shields will apply for. Now, it'll actually not give him those shields directly. It is not a direct restore. What it does is it gives him a maximum amount of shields, and it will begin his shield recharge pretty much instantly. So we see he starts regenerating shields and it goes all the way up to 660. Now, another cool thing about Haven is if he ever leaves my radius, or if I turn Haven off, he will retain whatever shields he had as overshields. Now, as far as I can tell in my testing, this cannot exceed the normal overshield amount. I believe for companions and sentinels it's actually lower, but for warframes it's 1200 overshields. For Harrow, I believe it goes up to 2400. So just keep in mind, you can generate overshields. You don't always have to be next to allies for them to gain benefit from your shield. Additionally, the overshields do not count as being protected by your Haven for the purposes of the invulnerability. So if you want to be passing your passive invulnerability to allies, you do actually have to have Haven on, and they do have to be in range. It isn't enough for them to just have the overshield. Now, interesting notes about that specifically, about overshields. If you want to be able to proc Haven for a true maximum amount of overshield, you're going to need at least 2 mods. And if we come up here, I believe we can run Umbral Intensify. That's going to get us to 239. we actually need 140% more. So that would actually be 240. If we come over here and we look at our abilities again, we see that our shield capacity is 1195. So we could almost proc a full overshield for allies. I'm sorry, for allies. Granted, it will take time to regenerate. So if I go ahead and proc this, I'll go ahead and do it on my carrier. You're gonna see he gets a lot of shield. Now again, on carrier, on sentinels, companions, etc., we're not going to be able to keep that full amount. I believe it looks like it's about half. So probably about 600 is the amount of overshields you can keep on sentinels, companions, etc. I just wanted to keep that, you know, in the forefront for you guys. If you want to max out the 1200 overshield for allies, it's going to be about 140% ability strength. For your sentinel, if you just care about your sentinel, then it's going to be like 20%, I want to say. It's barely any because the max is 600. You start with 500, so it's like 20% more. So just keep that in mind. It's pretty interesting. Another interesting aspect of how this thing's mechanics actually work. If I turn this thing on, we deal damage to enemies. We've kind of talked about that already. However, we deal damage one at a time. So these things are not taking damage from my little dude. They're only taking damage from me. And they were taking, I think, about 13, but I have like blind rage and a couple other things. Let me take those back off just so we can do a test for a little bit longer. Let's turn it on again, and we see we're doing about 5 damage, and you don't see any tendrils coming off of my robot. Now, that being said, and let me see if I can... It's really hard to get the distancing right because he follows so closely. But your allies do project those shields as well. It doesn't matter if you have 4 allies, if you have 8 allies, if you have 100 allies standing right on top of one enemy. They will only take damage from one of the beams. And I think it prefers you. From what I've seen, and there could be some lag in there and stuff like that, it always prefers your beams as opposed to allies' beams. So just keep in mind, this thing doesn't actually scale with the number of allies standing near an enemy. Enemies take a unique 1 beam per haven, essentially. So just keep that in mind. It's not extremely good at damage. In fact, it's extremely bad at dealing damage. I would not recommend in any way putting strength on Haven for the damage component, just the shield component. So now that we kind of have some of the unique aspects of sort of how Haven works, let's talk about stats. Stats are going to be really important because this thing works kind of wonky. First of all, efficiency. It will affect our drain. It will affect our drain per second per ally, our drain per second per enemy. It affects all of those things, and it will be very, very important when you're designing your builds. So let's go ahead and take a look at ability efficiency and duration. So this ability is affected by duration in 2 ways. First of all, it is affected on the drain per ally and the drain per enemy. It is additionally affecting shield recharge. So our shield recharge percent that we give to allies is affected by ability duration. Let's go ahead and take a look at how the drain works though. So final energy drain is equal to energy drain times 2 minus ability efficiency over ability duration. So the way I'm going to kind of show you how this works is, let's go ahead and put on fleeting expertise. And this is kind of a cluster here. So we put fleeting expertise on, and we see that none of our drains changed. None of them changed. Our shield recharge did change. So that confirms we have fleeting expertise on. But what effectively does this mean? Well, our main drain, the one at the top, should have changed. That's straight up just a bug. If we come out here and we cast the ability, it will not cost 250. It will cost less than that. So if we expected to see 250, this would be at 3305 to cast, and we're at Did I have some sort of overshield on or something? Or is it just that efficient? Um, yeah, it's just that efficient. So it costs basically 100 instead of, 250. So it is actually affecting the top one, but the other two are correctly showing that it is not affecting them. It does, in fact, cost 5 per second for an ally and 25 per second for an enemy. Now, why does this work, you might ask? Why does it work out like this? Well, if we took this 2 and we minus our ability efficiency, right? Our ability efficiency in this setup right now would be 1.6. We have 60% bonus efficiency. So that's 2 minus 1.6, that equals 0.4. Well, what's our ability duration? Well, we had fleeting expertise, so it subtracted 60%, that's 0.4 as well. So we have 0.4 over 0.4, which is equal to 1, which is 100%. So effectively putting this mod on doesn't actually change our drain amounts at all. It doesn't affect drain amounts at all. So just keep in mind, fleeting expertise will decrease all of your base casts, your Balefire initial cast, your Pillage cast, your Haven initial cast, etc. But it will have a net 0 effect on all of your drain per seconds. So that's kind of an interesting caveat to this ability, and it will also allow you to do certain things. So for instance, if you don't really care about maintaining these things, but you see an ally's about to die over there and you want to project Haven to give them your passive invincibility, you can do that effectively because fleeting expertise would cost way less front loaded, and you're going to have to time it well. You're going to want to time that well because your per second drain isn't really going to be affected that much, right? So you don't want to leave it on with this kind of setup. You would want to cast it once and then get rid of it after, 2 or 3 seconds. Another really interesting mod that you can put on here is narrow-minded. So narrow-minded drastically increases ability duration and lowers range. So this is sort of going to be your sustainment setup. So if you cast Haven, in this setup, you're going to have a very small drain per second for allies and enemies. It's going to be basically cut in half, but your radius is going to also be much smaller. Now, this is good and bad. You won't be able to affect allies as easily, but you also won't be affecting enemies as easily, which means you're going to be able to turn Haven on and basically forget about it. Now, this sort of setup, if you're using narrow-minded, is really just for your companion. If you have Sentinels, they'll always be in it. If you have other companions, Moas, Kubros, Kavats, they wander off sometimes, but usually they'll be in it. So narrow-minded is really strong if you're alone and Haven isn't doing anything for you, because it doesn't buff you. If you just want to buff your Sentinel, narrow-minded is very, very strong, and you can put it on there, throw some strength on there, and make your Sentinel much tankier. Now, if you want to go for allies, you're probably going to need some range. You're probably going to want something like that, but just know it's a double-edged sword. You're going to be hitting enemies more often too, which is going to drain you in the end. So overall, I'd say if you want to run Haven as an ally buffing tool, you're probably going to want to run a very balanced build. You're going to want a little bit of efficiency, a little bit of duration, because you want to get that shield recharge up. You're going to want some strength to get a bigger shield onto enemies, a bigger maximum cap. And you're going to want some range to affect allies further away, because 15-meter base range isn't super great. It's okay. It's, it's like average at best, but for a support skill, it really lacks, especially at higher level missions where everybody's flying around like ninjas all the time. So I'm going to go ahead and end the video here like I always do. If I have missed anything, if you guys know about anything that, like a different interaction or a skill, or hey, you didn't realize that worked like this, please let me know in the comment section below. I'm learning too. But I think that's going to do it for this video. Thanks for watching.